Power is a bad story. It's a corrupt way of looking at the world. It leads to violence. It's generally manifested in service to a narrow kind of hedonism, because why have power unless it's to get exactly what the hell the worst of you wants from moment to moment? If you're not under the sway of some self-centered and relatively malevolent whim, you don't need to use power on other people, because you could just ask them to go along for the journey. And maybe they would. That's what you do when you play instead of when you use force. That's what you do when you invite instead of using force. That's what you do when you establish a vision that other people share instead of being a tyrant. Well, that's what you do if you're mature. That's even what 2-year-olds understand by the time they're 3, when they start engaging in pretend play with a would-be friend. Who's a friend to a 2-year-old? Well, the first thing, or 3-year-old, because 3-year-olds start to become social. Well, the first thing you want to do if you're a 3-year-old is play a game with someone. That's not the same as having your own game, right? If you play a game with someone else, there are some intrinsic rules. Well, what are the rules? Well, how about they get a turn, right? And maybe a generous turn, right? Because if you're going to have a friend and you want the friend to like you, which is kind of like the definition of a friend, and someone who likes you would like to see you again, and that continuity of the desire to see you again and to play together, that's the definition of friendship. It's a sequence of games played with the same person. The game has to be voluntary. It has to be invitational. It has to be reciprocal, right? And so what you're trying to do with your 2-year-old is you're getting them to sacrifice the immediate gratification of their instincts to reciprocity, right? Now, you do something that's a bit more sophisticated than that too, because the other thing you do with children and yourself and with people you love, if you're the least bit sensible, is you let them know that they shouldn't conduct themselves in a manner in the immediate present that compromises their future, right? That's what you mean when you tell your child, don't do stupid things. Well, what's a stupid thing, generally speaking? Something interesting and entertaining in the moment that you pay for, right? And that's the same as an impulsive bad habit in adulthood. It's like the definition of a bad habit. A bad habit is something that works now and not so good tomorrow, or next week, or next month, or next year, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. That implies as well that just as the child establishes a relationship of reciprocity with the friend, by starting to understand the future, they establish a reciprocal relationship with their future self. And that's the same thing. So what maturation is, we all know this, maturation is the ability, let's say, to share and to forego gratification, to delay gratification. What does it mean to delay gratification? It means you don't get what the hell you want right now all the time. You have to conduct yourself in a manner that assures communal stability, let's say, and reciprocity. And in the enjoyable sense, you want to be surrounded by friends and compatriots and people who move you forward and people who wish you well, because that's going to be a lot better for you than the alternative. And you want to do that in a manner that assures the future. The whole higher cortical apparatus that human beings are blessed and cursed with is there to integrate the possessing spirits that might otherwise be impulsive and fractionating, to integrate them into a personality that can act reciprocally in relationship to others and guide itself as a consequence of apprehension of the future. It's a definition of maturity. Now, you kind of know this because as your children mature, as you've matured, the amount of time you can consider expands, right? For the 13-year-old, for a 4-year-old sitting down to take piano lessons, half an hour is an eternity, right? For a 13-year-old, 6 months into the future is forever. By the time you're 50, a year is like a week, right? Well, and there's a loss in that to some degree, but there's a huge gain because as you develop, your capacity to apprehend the consequences of your actions across broader spans of time is much improved. And that reflects cortical maturation. And the same thing happens with regards to your ability to manage yourself socially. What does it mean to manage yourself socially? Well, it means, as I said, that it's not all about you. Your aim can't be the immediate gratification of the whims that possess you. If you're married, if you have a wife or husband, is your wife or husband, how do they stand in relationship to their importance in relationship to you? Well, we could just think about it in a sort of clear-headed manner. Let's say you have a scrap with your wife. You have a fight with your wife, a disagreement, and you win. You win. She's wrong. She's punished for it in whatever way you can manage. What's the problem with that? You're right. She's wrong. Well, let's say you do that 50 times. Well, now you're living with someone you always defeat. And so now you're living with someone who's defeated. And what's the problem with that? Well, they're around. Right, and so maybe that's the problem with attaining a manipulated victory over your marital partner. Fine if it's a one-off, but they're there when you wake up in the morning. And so is the consequence of your, what? Self-centered, power-based maneuvering? Right, and maybe you're a victorious tyrant and she's a defeated slave. Well, that's not much of a victory there, buddy. Right, and the same applies to any reciprocal social relationship. If you have any sense, if you think it through, you want to build up the people that are around you. Well, why? Well, because they're around you. And so if you made generous offerings to the social world and you improved the nexus of relationships that you were involved in, why wouldn't that be good for you? Now, you might think, well, there's only so much to go around, and if everyone else wins, I lose. But that's another story, and it's the story of power. And it's a very bad story, and it's not true. Because the truth of the matter is that there's more than enough for everyone to do, and your victory doesn't have to ever come at the cost of someone else's defeat. I shouldn't say ever. I mean, there are times when people are head-to-head, and the game that's being played isn't fair, and it's your victory or your defeat. But those are very pathological and unnecessary circumstances, and it would be better to do everything you can to ever avoid being in a situation like that. Situations like that arise when your relationships have deteriorated radically. And I would say as well, the same thing applies to the story of power. Power is the manner in which social relationships, or even your relationship with yourself, it's the story that makes itself manifest when the proper story collapses, right? It's the degeneration of a state that turns it into a tyranny. It's not the victory of a state. And it's the same at every level of social relationship. If you're tyrannizing yourself, that's a failure. If you're tyrannizing your wife, that's a failure. The same with your children, the same with your friends. It's not an optimized pattern of being. It's not about you. It's not about the whims that narrowly possess you. That's a more accurate formulation. So what does that imply? If it's not about you, it means you have to give up something to be social and to mature, right? What do you have to give up? You have to give up what the 2-year-old gives up. You have to give up getting what the hell you want, the second you want it, all the time, no matter what. So what are you giving up? You're giving up the momentary whims that possess you that you could identify with. You're giving up your wants. Maybe you're giving up your needs. What does it mean to give them up? I said it means the other person gets a turn. It means that the future is taken into account. What does that imply? It implies that you made a sacrifice. Okay, so here's something to think about, and it'll guide us through the rest of the talk. The basis of maturity in community is sacrifice. Okay, now it has to be that way. You understand? Like, this isn't an arbitrary proposition. We're communal beings and we're future-oriented. So because we're future-oriented, we have to give up the present, right? Because we have to bring up the present. We cannot sacrifice the future to the present. That's why you can't do impulsive, stupid, terribly interesting and entertaining things. People drink so that they can fool themselves into thinking that's okay. And it is, it's a blast while it's happening, but the next day tends to be a rather dismal affair, especially if you've seriously gone overboard, let's say. And the reason for that is that it's too easy to sacrifice the future to the impulsive pleasures of the moment. And you know, as a self-conscious being, that you're going to have to bear the consequences of your actions as they propagate across time. And then it's the same with the others that you come into contact with. Because you're communal, because you're social, that's the human mode of being, you have to give up the fact that it's all about the local and narrow present-centered you. That's the sacrifice. So what does that mean? Community is predicated on sacrifice. All right, so that implies that the central story of mankind is one of sacrifice. Okay, so now if you know that, you've got a fundamental key to understanding the fundamental stories of our culture, the biblical stories, because the biblical library is an examination